Hi, welcome to Semiconductor Geopolitics Taiwan's View. This is the 5th episode of our cross-strait series. In the last episode, we talked about the cross-strait trade of chips, which is the exchange of products. In this episode, we're going to focus on the flow of talents in the semiconductor industry. As everyone knows, Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing capability is way ahead of China. One of the reasons to this is that we have more experienced engineers. As a result, a phenomenon has emerged. Some of the engineers have gone to the other side to work. Why do Taiwanese engineers go to China? Are there many or only a few? Do they contribute much to China's semiconductor industry? How does Taiwan deal with this phenomenon? These are the questions we'll answer in this episode. The flow of Taiwanese semiconductor engineers to China happened sporadically at the end of last century. In the 21st century, there were two major waves of migration to China, which were both caused by similar reasons.
我们看到在半导体产业呢，会有比较大规模的这个人才移动的情况，就是有并购案发生。第一波是2000年的时候，台积电并购了4大半导体。第二波是在2015年的时候，美光并购了华亚科和后续并购瑞晶科。
Dr. Richard Zhang, also known as Zhang Rujing, is the founder of WSMC, Worldwide Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. The WSMC he founded in Taiwan was merged by TSMC, which was a decision made by the major shareholders without his knowledge. In response to this, Richard Zhang led more than 400 staff to relocate in China and re-established his business all over again. The foundry he founded in Shenzhen in April 2000 is now China's #1 chip manufacturer, SMIC, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation.
我们20多年前来的时候呢，发现大陆的市场很大，人才比较少，资金有一些，政府支持力度是很强的，经营管理的团队经验比较少。在经过这20年以来，我们看到中国大陆的市场是更大，而资金也很充沛，政府支持更强了。但是台湾的优势呢，在人才、技术上面还是有些地方是领先的。这样子看起来的话，两岸合作是最好的。
Dr. Zhang Rujing was born in China and grew up in Taiwan, and then later went to the United States for study and work. He's a strong advocate for cross-strait cooperation. However, this doesn't mean that Taiwanese engineers' decision to work in China is necessarily driven by ideology. This phenomenon could be interpreted as a natural result caused by the industrial technology gap across the strait.
那通常，发展比较落后的地区会向发展比较先进的地区呢去寻求人才的协助。其实台湾早期也从日本引进了很多的人才。那在半导体这个行业里面，台湾的确领先中国非常多。所以那加上两岸同文同种，所以台湾人才会变成中国挖角的一个非常自然的一个对象。
As far as the global semiconductor industry is concerned, it seems to be a reasonable move for China to poach Taiwan's engineers. In order to achieve that, they must offer appealing conditions.
当然，经济因素一定是一个最主要的考量啊。这边的薪水给的高嘛，大概是3倍起跳啊，一律都是3倍起跳。
当初从日本留学回台湾之后，我发现台湾的半导体产业已经分工比较细了。那刚好在大陆有一个机会，就是你可以在那个环境下，可以做一些比较独当一面的，历练了很多的工作的机会，所以我觉得是一个很好的机会，可以贡献我自己的所学，而不是做一些比较分工比较细微的工作。这第一个。那第二个原因当然是薪水也比较高啊，这个是不可否认的事实。那第三个原因的话是这边的这个语言啊、文化啊、饮食的话，跟台湾都比较接近。
In addition to pull, there's also push. Taiwan's listed company used to have dividend allotment system, allowing employees to receive additional income from the stock market. But this system was abolished in 2008.
大概从2008年到2012年这4年之间，很多大陆的公司都是以大概5倍的薪资来挖台湾人。台湾人算了以后，觉得既然台湾已经没有分红配股，他们认为大概2-3年的时间可以赚台湾工作10年的钱，他们觉得过来的话比较划算。
Income is not the sole factor when it comes to relocation. Most engineers have families, and it takes their family's consent for relocation to work.
我是单身，所以倒没有所谓的家累的顾虑啊。但是很多人就是因为会有这个家累的考量，可能就没有那么大的意愿来中国大陆这边发展这样子。
After recruiting Taiwanese engineers, Chinese firms usually try to squeeze every bit of their expertise out in the shortest time possible. Engineers who are interested in relocating in China should definitely take this into consideration.
一定要把你的榨光哦，因为那就是代表你还有那个利用价值，所以他会来把你榨光。以能力、技术来讲的话，这个含金量会比较高嘛，所以他就是想办法从你身上淘金嘛。
When talent flow in a healthy market becomes state-endorsed poaching, it is no longer a matter of career development of individuals, rather a matter of national security. This problem caught the attention of the Ma Ying-jeou administration, which commissioned research facilities to delve into the nature of it.
我们的结论是从我们宪法保障人民工作自由的角度来看，人才的移动似乎并没有特殊的法令可以管制。但是如果他的移动呢，侵害了前雇主的这个利益，或是泄露了不该泄露的机密资讯的时候，那我就认为是一个潜在的国安问题。那这个就需要政府的这个涉入跟协助来处理。
Before the legislation of pertinent regulations, there was a time when China semiconductor companies' poaching activities in Taiwan were open and blatant.
因为半导体产业制程是一个很精密的一个很长串的流程，所以通常你个别的挖角大概就不会有太大的注意。所以一般大陆的手法是找到一个高阶的经理人，然后透过他呢作为粽子头，把一串粽子挖起来，就是说能够把一整个团队挖走的方式来进行。
It wasn't until 2022 when the Tsai Ing-wen administration formulated the 5 national security laws and other related regulations that Taiwan was able to handle this national security issue in legal terms.
It's always been difficult for political forces to shape talent flows, especially between countries that naturally trade a lot. I think the cases where you do have governments succeeding in redirecting talent flows are where there's a geopolitical relationship that is very competitive and that enables governments to enact pretty restrictive legislation.
As a historian, Chris Miller recalled that there were many similar measures restricting the flow of talents between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
The US has imposed restrictions on where US citizens can work with certain Chinese firms. The Korean government has increasing use of restrictions to limit Korean workers' collaboration with Chinese firms. And I think in Taiwan as well, my sense is that the general atmosphere is becoming more skeptical of those types of exchanges and the risks that they might pose to Taiwanese firms in particular.
There are nearly 500,000 employees in the Taiwanese semiconductor industry, and during the past 20 years, there were only roughly 3,000 engineers that went to China, probably 4,000 tops. Some may say that this was not a disconcerting number. However, in the face of engineer shortage, every single engineer counts.
我们内部的资源的供应也显然到了差不多瓶颈嘛，就很简单讲，这个台积电所需要的工程师嘛，已经慢慢超出我们的负荷了嘛，就是应该现在把所有的工程师都已经用尽了嘛。
缺人缺工的情况是非常非常明显的。我们强调应用性的研发，不要只着眼于想要发论文，而是要重点摆在怎么帮产业解决问题。帮产业做一些技术提升的一些研发的工作， 所以在学校里面设置的这个制程、封装、检测、半导体中下游的一些我们所谓类产业的实作环境，让学生在学校里面能够学习到真正产业现在所最重视的这个实战能力。
那这些年来，这个半导体的高速发展，已经让我们的工程师基本上已经很少人要念博士啊。因为你念到硕士的时候，这些厂商就已经来不及要他们赶快聘到生产线上去工作嘛，对不对？那这个对我们长期的发展来讲也不是好的啊。没有人在做这个尖端前沿的研究，将来这个产业是没办法持续的。
Would the Taiwanese semiconductor industry decline? Whoa, that's something unbearable for us. This is really a national security issue. But to be fair, Taiwanese engineers have been migrating to the other side for more than 20 years. What roles do they actually play in the Chinese chip industry? Is their contribution game-changing?
我觉得台湾人在大陆的半导体产业里面，他扮演的角色应该说是一个，有点类似于先驱性的角色。
我觉得这个是很明显的哈。早期啊，台湾的半导体的技术领先大陆是很多的，而大陆这边的市场机会又很大。譬如说，很多台湾的工程师过来，他就会介绍台湾的很多半导体的材料，台湾的设备，这个也造成了台湾的很多设备和半导体的材料就卖到大陆来了。一方面，大陆也成长，台湾照样也得到各方面的好处，这个是一个要注意的，对的。是。
If we want to make a more accurate prediction of the development of cross-strait chip industries, first, we must answer one question. Will the two sides be competing or cooperating with each other in the future?
一般谈到两岸在半导体的竞合，我们会分成上游、中游跟下游。上游很明显的两岸是充分竞争的，甚至不排除在2025甚至最慢2026年，中国的 IC 设计就会超越台湾，台湾落居世界第3。但是晶圆代工、晶圆制造，台湾是远远的超越中国大陆。中国大陆要赢过台湾，恐怕机会不大。所以在晶圆代工这一部分，可能合作的意义大于竞争。但是最下游的封装测试又不一样了。台湾的封装测试占全世界50%，世界第1，但中国的封装测试紧追在台湾是世界第2，20%几，它又全力发展。所以封装测试这一部分，虽然说现阶段是谈不上竞争，因为毕竟有一段差距。可是如果放眼未来，恐怕是竞争大于合作。
If we go beyond the Taiwan Strait and view this matter through the lens of US-China tech war, or Cold War 2.0, as some may call it, the competition between Taiwanese and Chinese semiconductor industries will surely rise in the foreseeable future. Therefore, the flow of engineers or industrial talents will likely decrease. If you enjoy our program, please like and hit that subscribe button. See you next time on the Cross-Strait series. Bye-bye.